Hank tried to grab the knife. She was unsuccessful for some ridiculous reason, and they got an intense stare, and all he could think was the stare. Oh no, I have to taser her now.
Got my eyes straight ahead, got my head in the game. With the red light on, I'm just waiting for the change. Keep my head down low.
Hi, Jay Fallon. Thank you for listening to the slippery slope. So we've got to get through the evidence that the officer who tasered the great grandmother, 95 years old she used a walking frame to get around, a walking frame. So she wasn't the most nimble of 95-year-olds, used a walking frame. She was making some threats with a steak knife. She was in a nursing home. Old mate police officer comes in about 2-ish in the morning, says, you know what? Good idea. I'll taser her. She falls, cracks her head, she dies. That's the long and the short of it. So we're going to go through the evidence, going to go through what he said, his defense. He's pled not guilty, and I just want to walk through what he's saying about why he's not guilty, why he believes he's not guilty. Okay, and obviously, so if you haven't seen this podcast before, so I used to be a police officer with the Queensland Police Service. This chap is a police officer with the New South Wales Police Service. So different states, but very, very, very similar training. Obviously, a lot of legislations are all basically the same anyway. So similar training. The equipment that we use it's almost identical anyway as well. So here we go. It came out on ABC News just the other day. Police officer Kristian White gives evidence about tasering 95-year-old Clare Nowland. Here's a picture of him there. He's quite a large chap, quite big. He was in the job, still is, I believe, for quite a reasonable amount of time, over 10 years, I believe it was. It is. So the police officer who tasered 95-year-old who was using a walker and armed with a steak knife has told a jury the great grandmother made it clear she was going to use the knife on us. Senior Constable Kristian White is giving evidence at his own trial after pleading not guilty to the manslaughter of Clare Nowland. Nowland was tasered by Senior Connie White at the Yellumby Lodge and Aged Care Facility, Cooma, in May of 2023, after she was found using a four-wheeled walker and holding a serrated steak knife in her right hand. Senior Connie White deployed his taser. Nowland fell to the ground and hit her head. She was taken to Cooma Hospital, where she was diagnosed with an inoperable brain bleed and died a week later. The senior Connie White told the court on Monday he was devastated by her death. It's a picture of her if you're watching this on video. So on the sixth day of the trial in Sydney, defence barrister Troy Edwards SC called on his clients. It was the first time the officer had spoken publicly since the incident. He was asked about his training as a police officer and if he remembered the advice about dealing with someone carrying a knife. It was taught that you don't underestimate anyone carrying a knife at all. This is what Senior Constable White said. The officer told the jury he did not think Mrs. Nowland would be seriously injured as a result of being tasered and was asked how he felt about her death. I'm upset and devastated. I never intended for her to be injured by it at all. Okay, before I continue reading with the article, I just want to talk about when I was at the academy. So I was in my 30s. And we'd gotten to the section where we were getting trained in the use of the taser. So when it came to tasers and cap spray, you had the option with the taser. You didn't have to, but it was strongly recommended that you actually they use the taser on you. So they wouldn't shoot it and have the prongs stick into you. What they would do, because they would just reuse the same cartridge, they had some tape. They had the ends cut off and just the ends exposed, the wires exposed, and they would tape it on you from different sections of the body. And they would explain what the taser was actually doing and what it was meant to do, how it would lock up the muscles in between where the prongs had landed on the body, and it would lock up all the muscles and And what you were looking for when you were deploying your taser, the kind of spread that you were looking for the prongs to hit the person's body, because there's a particular spread that you were trying to get. It would be the optimum deployment of the taser. So I was when came to my turn. So I laid down, and placed the they'd placed the wires on either side, either just above my hip, on the very part of my lower back, just on either buttocks. Um, and I'd done some when I was younger. I'd done some work. I used to work with like on a jackhammer, and when they deployed the taser on me, it felt like I had a jackhammer on either side of my leg, on either leg, and I had a jackhammer on both sides, just hammering down on my hips, on the top of my legs, on my back. It was, okay, I can't say it was painful, but it felt like a jackhammer slamming down on my lower back. That's exactly what it felt like. And they were screaming out, put your arms behind your back, because the purpose of doing it was to show that if you didn't get the spread when you deployed your taser, if it hit certain parts of the body, that person may still be able to, even though the taser was being used, was deployed, and it was working. Let's just say it just hit, like with me, just hit either legs. They would still be able to move their arms around. The person would still be able to attack you, defend themselves. They would still be able to strike you if you moved in too close. So it was showing that you could still move. And sure enough, they're screaming at me, put your arms behind your back, all this stuff. I just thought, stuff this. I'm writing this out. It was a shock to my system. I found it hard to really comprehend what was going on, because, like I said, it felt like I had two jackhammers on either side of my lower back just slamming down on me, and it was very uncomfortable. I can't say it was painful. It was just, it's hard to explain it, but it's really hard I felt like it was hard to compute what was going on. And I just thought, I don't like this. I don't like it at all. And I'm just going to ride this out until the 5 seconds is over. So there, after I experienced that, there is no way I would ever go out and see a person with a walking frame, whatever age, and think, oh yeah, I should just slam them with a taser. This will be good. So I just have doubts whether this officer actually experienced what it was like to get tasered. It is not something I would recommend. It will bring down the biggest of persons, the biggest gym junkie. It will actually. We were told, if I remember correctly, that the more muscle mass you have, even the worse it will be. It really locks up the muscles in between where each prong goes. So I have doubts whether this fella has actually experienced the taser himself, because, mate, if you have, in my mind, you're not going to you, you're not going to do this. Let's continue. So the officer, he was upset and devastated. I never intended for her to be injured by it at all. See, I don't understand this. You never intended. If you didn't intend for her to be injured at all, and she's 95 years old. You first off, when you're at the academy, when you're initially being trained, you're told you don't use a taser on the elderly. You just don't do it. And obviously you don't even use it on mine, especially, the really young. So you never intended. I don't know what kind of it's anyway. Edwards asked his client if he took Mrs. Nolan's elderly state into account before deploying the taser. White said he did, and issued a number of verbal directions for her to drop the steak knife. Now let's remember, she suffered from dementia. I'm not sure. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, but I'm not sure how your verbal warnings are going to come across with someone who's suffering from dementia. He says, I was going to give her every opportunity to have her comply with my directions, he said. Did you believe you did that? Edwards asked. I thought I did. That's what Connie White said. The officer told the court he initially hoped his colleague, Acting Sergeant Jessica Hank, could grab the knife of Mrs. Nolan to disarm her. This I find a little hard to comprehend this part. So there's a senior officer, there's a sergeant there. Obviously, she's got a lot of experience. If he's got 10 years roughly or more, she would have more at least experience. She's a sergeant, albeit acting, but she's still a sergeant. So he'd hoped that she would be able to. I don't understand why she hadn't taken control of the scene. She's the ranking officer. Anyway, he said the failed attempt resulted in Mrs. Nolan giving a very intense stare. Oh, a very intense stare. Obviously, it's a very intense stare. What the heck? These are two These are two experienced police officers, intimidated by a 95-year-old with a walking frame holding a steak knife that's a serrated edge steak knife. She's a sergeant. She's trying to grab the knife. Just off the top of my head, I can think of a number of ways that you'd be able to grab that knife. I would have maybe asked the staff, asked the staff for a sheet, a blanket, a cloth, a tea towel to throw over her head to grabbed out my baton and tapped her hand with it or something like that, thrown some water in her face to, startle her and then try and grab the knife. She's 95 years old. Something. Surely there's something that these officers, but no, the sergeant couldn't think of anything. So she's tried to grab it. She couldn't grab it because she's too scared of a serrated knife. And then she got a very intense stare. So everyone's backed off. He continues, her actions were not safe and becoming intimidating towards us. White said Mrs. Noland raised the knife and pointed it towards him and his colleagues, prompting him to draw his taser. She raises the knife. She's 95 years old, and the sergeant can't grab her by the wrist. Now, I would never recommend you do this to someone wielding a knife, except if the person is nearing 100 years of age and can barely move. Then I would say maybe you consider it. Maybe you consider grabbing the arm of the person wielding the knife. Then I would think, yeah, okay, this might be a different situation. So he goes on to say, I felt the threat was increasing significantly. It definitely clearly communicated her intent that she was going to use the knife if anyone got near her. I think this is a very important part of his statement, his defense. He's saying if anyone got near her, she was going to use the knife. So, and this is one thing I've noticed with a few of the police shootings that have gone on over the last couple of years, actually, that I've been looking into. He's saying that if anyone got near her, she was going to use the knife. And it seems to me that a lot of officers don't understand the idea of a tactical retreat anymore. There's been a number of shootings that have gone on, especially with our GDs, general duties officers, and I've thought, why didn't you use a tactical retreat? Why did you feel the need to stand and hold your ground when you've got the person in the room by themselves? Why can't you tactically retreat and try and try and negotiate from a safe position? The person's got a knife, you've got a gun, they're not going to get through, but for some reason you feel the need to shoot instead of tactically retreating. I've talked to a few others about this actually, and it seems like, yeah, it's a skill that people have just suddenly forgotten, the tactical retreat. So he says threat was increasing significantly. If anyone goes near her, remember she's 95, she can't move very well, and they talk about this coming up. He said simply walking away from Mrs. Noland would not have resolved the situation. Seems a little strange to me. It wouldn't have resolved. Okay, it mightn't have resolved it. But if his main fear is that if anyone got near her, she was going to use it on someone else. If everyone pulls back and doesn't go near her, if no one's going near her, and if she's not threatening, if he's not concerned that she's going to use the knife on herself, and if no one goes near her, Why can't you just tactically retreat, talk to her from a distance, wear her out maybe? She's 95 years old. She's not going to be able to last that long. Anyway, he says simply walking away. I don't understand this. I really don't. I wouldn't have resolved the situation, and activating the warning arc of his taser was a communication technique to try and scare Claire. 95 years old, I dare say she's got no idea what the flip a taser is. She's got no idea what the warning arc. So I assume he's talking about the little red dot that comes on and okay, the 95-year-old's going to understand all this with 95-year-old with dementia. The jury heard the great grandmother had a half a second pause before she continued walking forwards. There's a picture of him here. He's a big dude. He is not small. This is White. Earlier, he was asked why he said bugger it before to start discharging the taser. He said he took into account the attempts to communicate with Mrs. Nolan were not working. The incident had been going on for several hours. I don't think it was actually, and the danger was increasing. This is the other issue. I'm not sure this is such a great defense. What he's saying, the danger was increasing. How is it increasing? If you get everyone to step back, step out of the room, step out of her reach, she's armed herself with a knife. If she's got no other instruments there that she can arm herself with, no other knives in the vicinity, a 95-year-old who gets around with a walking frame, I don't even know if she could have held on to two knives anyway. Would have been ridiculous. There's no guns present other than the guns the police had. How was how is it going to be increasing? I don't know. He says, I didn't want to tase Claire, but I was also weighing up the safety of everyone present there. Why was anyone else present? You've got a person suffering from dementia, 95 years old. Sorry to harp on that, but it's important. 95 years old with a walking frame. You get everyone out of the room. Tactical retreat. You get everyone out of the room, out of the vicinity, so she can't make a sudden plunge if that's what he was so concerned about, and stab someone or scrape them with the serrated edge. You get everyone out of harm's way, and you continue to talk to her. So he thought, weighing up the safety of everyone present, her intent was clear. She was going to use the knife on us. So he wasn't concerned that the knife was going to be used on herself. I don't think his defense is very good at all. If he was just concerned that they were going to use the knife on us, you get everyone else out of the room. It's just him and the other sergeant who I don't know why you'd have a senior officer there and she's, good for not much. Anyway, and she can't work out what else to do either. Why it's not just you two in harm's way and you can't work out how to put it. Oh, crikey. I'll continue on. The accused said it was his responsibility as a police officer to ensure no one got stabbed. It's one of the core ethos of police to protect life. It's been part of our training from day dot. Senior Constable White told the court he had deployed a taser twice in unrelated incidents before his encounter with Mrs. Nowland. His cross-examination from Crown Prosecutor Bert Hatfield SC, he was asked whether Mrs. Nowland's physical characteristics were taken into account. Did she look like she was frail? Hatfield said. I think you're asking the proverbial piece of string question, Senior Constable White replied. What a stupid answer. Do you think he's being a bit cocky here? You're asking the proverbial piece of string question. Mr. Hatfield repeated the question. The police officer responded by saying she was not the frailest I've seen. Okay. I thought she looked quite well for someone at 95 years of age. Oh, he comes across a little arrogant or dumb. I don't know. The Crown also asked if Senior Constable White felt Mrs. Nowland would be able to reach the distance where he and Acting Sergeant Pank stood. So they were standing between 1.5 and 2 meters away. Remember, walking frame, serrated edged steak knife. In order to stab them, given it took her about a minute, it's taken her, Noland, the 95-year-old, it took her about a minute to move 1 meter from the desk to the doorway. There was nothing imminent about what Mrs. Noland was doing. I've got stared down. What kind of police officers? Seriously, what kind of police officers are these? It takes her a minute, 60 seconds to walk 1 meter. They're standing somewhere between 1.5 meters and 2 meters away. So the Crown said there was nothing imminent about what Mrs. Noland was doing. It seemed pretty imminent, her intent that she was going to stab anyone there, he said. Her intent. So he's judging her intent. It was imminent, her intent, that someone who can't move or someone who takes a minute to walk a meter, she was an imminent threat. Maybe to a slow moving caterpillar. Senior Constable White told the court he thought Mrs. Noland would have fallen into her walker when the taser engaged because she was hunched over at the time. But instead she fell backwards. Now this okay, I have been tasered, like I said. If he had been tasered before, he would know very well. You get tasered in the front, it's not that likely that you're just going to fall forward. I would have thought I've tasered someone as well, and they've kind of fallen sideways. They don't just fall forward like that into the thing. From what I saw, they fall sideways. I've seen people fall backwards. I don't know. He's just assumed. The Crown also put to Senior Constable White that there was about 60 seconds between him drawing his taser and discharging it at Mrs. Noland. The Crown also challenged Senior Constable White's assumption that Mrs. Noland had been wandering around Yallumby Lodge for several hours when the incident began around 3 a.m. and ended after 5 a.m. The court heard Senior Constable White graduated from the police academy in 2011 and had been stationed at Cooma since 2017. The prosecution alleges the 34-year-old committed manslaughter by way of criminal negligence or by committing an unlawful or dangerous act. Look, in all seriousness, I don't think his defense is going to hold up. His excuses, his reasoning for it, I don't think a jury is really going to buy it. It takes her a minute to get 1 meter, to walk 1 meter. You got a flipping sergeant in the room next to you who hasn't got the ability to think through a situation on how to disarm a great grandmother, 95 years old, with a walking frame, frail as, wielding around a steak knife, and she can't think how to possibly disarm her while he's talking to her. While White is talking to her, she can't even think, hey, I can come around the side and do something else to grab her, disarm her, or something. They're both scared of this woman with a serrated knife. I know I don't want to. Different people get scared in different situations, I'm sure, but it's hard to fathom how they can be so afraid and so intimidated. You heard it. He says Hank tried to grab the knife. She was unsuccessful for some ridiculous reason, and they got an intense stare, and all he could think was the stare. Oh no, I have to taser her now. Anyway, you let me know what you think. Just going through what his defense, what he's saying. This is how he's defending himself. I don't think it's going to hold up for him. In my opinion, he's going to lose. Let me know what you think. It's like a I don't know. It's it it's it. It's like those police officers over in Longreach who decided to do the sting on the other police officer who was stealing. So they've set up the hidden cameras, hidden surveillance, and then tried to take him to court for stealing $37 or whatever of chocolates. That's how ludicrous it is. It's like we've got police who just can't think through situations. Well, let me know what you think. I don't think that his defense, what he is saying here, deploying the taser, she can't move very fast. She's got a walking frame. You've got two police officers. He says that there was an imminent threat, but she's only threatening other people. Why on earth you don't just lock her in a room, one of yous, or just the two police officers, so there's no one else is being threatened other than you two? Okay. And why you can't think of another way to disarm her other than a freaking taser? I don't think his defense is going to hold up. There are too many red flags there of why he shouldn't have been tasering her. And what has happened to the tactical retreat? Is that just not a thing anymore? Anyway, my name's Jay Fallon, former police officer. So that's why I'm talking about it. Thank you for listening to the Slippery Slope.
And say it isn't real, and please don't go away. Just give me one more day. What if I could? What if I could turn back time? I'd make you smile again. And if I could unbreak your heart, and we could start again. What if I could? What if I could turn back time? I'd make you smile again. And if I could unbreak your heart, and we could start again. We could start again. We could start again. We could start again.